for you. There was a busy businessman. He was hectic in his schedule. He was constantly on the go. He was very good at what he did. But boy, did he have a lot of balls that he was juggling. He was keeping things going all over the place and seemed to be in like 3 places at the same time. And because of that, he's always looking for ways to kind of cut some corners, shave a few minutes off here, cut a little bit off the schedule here. And so he found this route. There was a territory he had to cover quite often. And he found this one stretch of country road that if he would take this one, it would cut some time off of his commute. And so he would use this road often. And after a while, things just kind of became familiar on this road. He'd go past fields and farmhouses and barns and cattle and horses, and he no longer saw those anymore. He was just so zeroed in on all the things that he had to get done and was kind of rehearsing in his mind all of his to-do lists and all these balls that he's juggling. How is he going to keep them all up there? And he just would zip right along on this road, not really paying attention to anything. One day as he came up to a very familiar bend in the road, he started around the bend and he saw something that wasn't so familiar, something that stood out that he hadn't seen before. It was a tattered cardboard sign on the side of the road that simply said, "Honk if you're happy." The businessman thought to himself, that's pretty naive of somebody to put that out there. Like, I've got time to do that. And he sped on his way. And trip after trip, as he would drive down the familiar stretch of road and really lose sight of fields and farmhouses and barns and crops and animals, he lost sight of the sign as well. Until one day, as he was making his familiar commute, he had his young daughter in the car with him. She began to spot all of the things that had become so familiar to him now that he was just missing them. And she was anxiously looking out the window. "Daddy, look at that barn. Daddy, look at the cows over here. Hey, Daddy, check out this. Look at this, Daddy." And she's pointing out all these things. And as they come up to that familiar curve, he knew the sign that was coming around there. And so on a whim, as they passed the sign, he honked. And his daughter smiled and giggled. The next time that he had his daughter in the car with him, she's again pointing out, "Daddy, look at this, look at this." But now she recognized the familiar curve. And she said, "Daddy, when we come around the sign, will you honk again? Please, Daddy, will you honk again?" And he did. And she smiled and giggled. And just for a brief moment, that businessman smiled and giggled a little as well. Time after time now, as he passed this familiar stretch of road, whether his daughter was in the car with him or not, he began anticipating this sign coming up. And every once in a while, as he'd drive by, he'd honk, honk, as he'd go by. And slowly it began to dawn on this very busy businessman, juggling all these things, trying to keep everything going, trying to keep everybody happy, trying not to miss out on anything. He recognized that just the anticipation of honking made him, well, happier. In fact, it slowly began to dawn on him that this entire 13-mile stretch of Highway 544 made him a little bit happier. He said, if I turn onto that stretch of highway on a scale of 1 to 10, my happiness level was about a 2. Just turning on to Highway 544 began to raise my happiness level a couple of notches. And as I'd come around this sign and go honk, honk, it would go up a couple of more. And although he was busy and didn't really have time for all the extras in his life, it began to kind of gnaw on his mind, who puts out a sign on the side of the road that says, "Honk if you're happy"? And so one day, just even though this is going to mess up his well-organized schedule, he decides, I've got to find out. And so he pulled into the driveway that was closest to the sign, and he thought maybe the person at this house might know something about it or be able to direct me there. And so he walked up to the front porch and he knocked on the door and waited a moment as a man came and opened the door. And he said, "Excuse me, sir, do you know anything about this sign out by the road? Honk if you're happy." And the man says, "Yeah, I know a lot about it. I put it out there." And he stepped out on the porch and he explained. He said, "My wife was terminally ill. Day after day, I would just sit there in a darkened bedroom with her. There was nothing doctors could do anymore. She was laying there just waiting for the day that she was going to die. And as I sat there with her day after day, finally I thought, I can't take the silence anymore. I've got to do something about this. So just on a whim, I went out to the barn to see what I could find. I found this old piece of cardboard and I found a spray paint can and I painted the words on there, "Honk if you're happy," and I put it out at the end of the road. And at first there was nothing. Nothing changed. It was still the same silence. And every once in a while, there was a honk here and there. And after a little while, they became a little bit more frequent. And pretty soon, day and night, cars were honking at us. And finally, my wife asked me, she said, what is all of this honking that's going on? And he explained to her the sign that he put out there. And he said, you know, that honking in that darkened bedroom became like medicine to her. She said it felt good to her to know that she was a part of the happiness that was all around her. Think about that businessman. Think about that before he ever honk with his daughter on a whim. Remember what he began to discover? It wasn't just the honk that made him happy. It was the anticipation of the honking that began to make him happy. He began, before he ever got to that tattered sign and went honk, honk as he drove by, he already was anticipating that was coming, and he already began to feel the joy come up, and he began to feel the anxiety begin to roll off of him a little bit. Now see, what most people would say is, well, if you've got some things to be thankful for, then give thanks. If you're happy, give the thanks. If you know, the sign on the side of the road said, if you're happy, honk. But you know what that businessman discovered? If you want to be happy, honk. The anticipation of honk, honk began to make him happy. See, we, I think, need to begin to develop in our life an anticipation of the good things that are coming.